to offer our companies. We have an accelerator model. I suspect you've all heard about accelerators. I know at the national level there's a lot of excitement around supporting them, but it's really an expanded concept. It takes what the traditional incubators did in terms of the staffing role and support role, and then really rolls that out to a broader community. So my job is much more exciting now than it would have been a year and a half ago, because instead of paying attention to 35 or 40 companies, I get to interact with, now we're up to about 400 members, and it have much more broad impact. So the pieces that are really critical for this early stage of taking raw academic technology and making it a commercial endeavor include funding, obviously. And so part of what we do is connect folks with funding. And these days, in the biosciences and also more so in the high tech, there's federal money that has become very important in the last couple of years. So there's the SBIR and STTR program. There continues to be venture capital outreach. Angels are moving into the venture capital space, so we're paying a lot of attention to angels and angel syndicates. And so the fun part about this, right, is the models are changing, and these entrepreneurs are changing with it. We just rolled out our 2011 educational programs, which my bias is, instead of towards highly formal and structured, it is more routine, short educational programs. I was very impatient as an entrepreneur. I had very little time. I had one or two things I really cared about because my company wouldn't be around in 6 months if I couldn't achieve those. So we are really focused on going where the entrepreneurs are and giving them what they need when they need it. We also just rolled out a new mentor program. Again, I say new. I'm reminded by my colleagues that nothing I've come up with is new. We've all thought about it before because it's been 30 years. They're absolutely right. The question is how to structure this in the most efficient and effective way, particularly meeting the 400 members that we have and growing. And so it's the mentor program. In the past, we had entrepreneurs in residence, we had other pieces, venture fellows. We're rolling it all in together and saying, look, there are experienced folks out there who can really impact the progress of these companies. And they're excited to help, and we're going to be the ones that pull them together, help them to do that, and connect them. And the Venture Lab program, funded by the Georgia Research Alliance, is critical to what we do. People pay attention to us when we can help them get some money. And this is a program that is one of the most efficient in terms of allocating sums that make sense at the right time for these companies as they evolve. It is focused on university technologies, but it's enormously helpful. And also, as the companies go through the Venture Lab program, the learning is tremendous and the feedback. So there's a huge amount of mentoring that goes on, as well as identification of management and funding. I mentioned our expansion. So a year and a half ago, my boss, Stephen Fleming, really shook up this 29-year-old incubator and said, wow, we're incubating, but we're also accelerating. And for $50, if you're a technology startup in Georgia, you can join us. And the idea is that, of course, we can't do what we did for 400 companies for 40. But what I'm thrilled about is that everyone gets to come in and say hello. You pay $50, you come down to Midtown or one of our other locations, which I'll talk about, and you get to meet all the catalysts. It's not a mystery. You get to see who we are and what we do. But the bar is still high. You still have to engage us in a way that makes sense and learn. And if you don't know, you then go through one of our educational programs. So we still very much have the idea that as an entrepreneur, you're going to have to get what you need, whether it be from the market or from ATDC or anyone else. Bless you. So we are expanding geographically. I'd love to be all over Georgia. But my first goal is to get out of Tech Square. Not that Tech Square isn't fabulous, and it's easy to hang out there and be very productive and do great things, but there's a ton of other stuff going on. So we do have fabulous 40,000 square feet, the second floor of Centergy in Tech Square, and that is critical because you do need a focal point, and that's a very appropriate one and productive one. We also, I started out the first 6 months in the Ford building, which is just down the street from Centergy. That's where we have wet lab space, and it's full now, first time since it was built 5 years ago. And we do have some space in Savannah as well, so it's wonderful to be able to work with the coast and all that's going on there. We're also expanding geographically without trying to buy more real estate. We're not in the real estate business. We are in the entrepreneur business. So we found out there's a bunch of them up in Gwinnett. So now we're there. So we partnered with UGA, and every Friday, one of Mike's former frat brothers, is that? Paul Freight, we won't tell you. So my colleague Paul. Yes. Georgia Tech Paul Freight. Oh, is there another one? I
thought he knew Paul Freight, my former roommate.
Well, he might. No, this is Paul Freight. Not at all. Not at all. So Paul's out there in Gwinnett, and then there's also a private group called Rome Atlanta, which has a great space off of 400 in Alpharetta, and we have a catalyst there. And I live in Vinings in Cobb County, so me and Keith are meeting with a couple folks in Cobb County, including Kennesaw State, to have conversations about how to meet up with entrepreneurs out there. We have to brag. It was wonderful. When I first came on, this sort of prize came down from Forbes, this recognition from Forbes. So yes, we are one of the top 10 technology incubators in the world. Thank you. We'll take that. We're continuing to, I'll just go back for a minute. The way we have this recognition is really the repeated funding and support and commensurate innovation that the group at ATDC has been able to do over the years. It's impressive. Georgia really is on the cutting edge and has been a model over the years for innovation around technology and startup development. You know, we may not have the numbers that Silicon Valley has, but it's amazing. People look to us for the innovative ideas about how to approach it. We just have a different ecosystem here. Some success stories. So Suniva is an example of a Georgia Tech spinout. It clearly would not have been here without ATDC. Some of our folks were digging in the labs, and we said, come on, do this. And, you know, we play a huge role early on, and then it tapers off. But we continue to have good relationships with these groups. But, you know, when you have $1 billion in sales, ATDC is maybe not as important as it was when you were chatting with the founder. Very excited. Vendor Mate, again, that's quite typical of our members. They're software focused, and Vendor Mate has gotten national recognition. And CardioMEMS is a great example of a very long and capital intensive process for monitoring irregularities in the heart and keeping people out of the hospital. Very excited by the latest clinical trials and the support by St. Jude Medical. So a variety of technologies, handful of success stories, but it's all of the entrepreneurs and the companies behind those handful of successes that we're working hard to support. Thank you very much.
Questions? Yes. Oh, get this thing lit. How do you light it back up? Oh, there. Okay. You're number 21. Adam.
First of all, thank you so much for coming and sharing. This is exciting when we hear from our leading institutions in Georgia that we have something to market and that we are looking outside the box from other states. And I do appreciate your effort and you being here in Georgia. We would have never thought you'd ever been anywhere else except Georgia. I want to congratulate, and I believe I'm correct, one of the committee members here, Chuck Martin, introduced the bill that had to do with the angel investors. So we commend him. It's already become a success, and I thank Chuck for that. I think that we've got something that's great, and especially for where we are situated geographically with Atlanta, Southeast. My question is this, is how are we marketing that, and are we working through the Department of Economic Development? Can you just share some of the product is great. The question is how are we getting this communicating these opportunities to the nation and the world, really?
That's a great question, because what we do is global. So even when I had my biotech company, I obviously networked locally, but our first deal was in Germany. So not only from a marketing perspective, but from serving our constituents, an external perspective is really critical. And so we work with Stacy Schuker and Sterling, who I've gotten to know over the last couple years in the bioscience side, particularly with Stacy, and getting to know others in terms of how ATDC basically is an attractive piece when you're thinking about management coming here, and our ability to identify high-value management and make sure that we're able to integrate them in the community and then find other opportunities depending on what goes on. So even though we need money, and I'm very grateful for the Angel Tax Credit, it's very fabulous, it's all about people, so we need management. So our big focus globally is on the people and the management that can make that happen. So one thing we do when the Economic Development Group is looking at recruiting companies, we're very interested in how those executives are connected in the community, and if they have a connection with technology or startups or an interest in strategically in their business around that, we immediately are a resource that have an intelligent interaction in that regard. But I'm very interested in having more conversations about how the ATDC piece and the ability to support technology startups can maybe be a bigger part of that message.
All right, thank you.
Please hold your questions. We want to make sure that Greg Louderman gets his say, and then we'll go back and ask questions of both of them. Thank you very much.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for letting us come in and share with you this morning. And I want to particularly say thanks to Marlet for setting this up. She has been the best kind of advocate for me in this program, which is a critical advocate. She's hammered me on this over the last few months, and I think the program plan is much better for it. My background, just very briefly, is in information technology and telecommunications. Back in the late 90s, I was working with Bell South and just amazed with what was possible with the technology, but thinking there has to be more to this, more that we can use this technology to grow our economy, and got engaged with some folks at Georgia Tech and started on a PhD, but got so excited about this stuff and got working on it, and well, starting a family too, but sojourning around Georgia, working with community leaders around the state, that my PhD became a second master's degree, and more importantly, had a lot of real-world learning that I've done over the last decade, working with just some amazing folks around the state. And essentially what I've learned, and this is not with lack of respect to my clients and other stakeholders around the state, because just wonderful, dedicated people, but what I've learned is that there's a knowledge gap out there, that a lot of the key decision makers around the state, private sector business leaders, public sector leaders, nonprofit civic sector leaders, it's not that they're not techies, because we don't want them to be techies, but they don't understand the strategic power of this technology. And the gap is not getting smaller, it's getting larger, because the technology is charging ahead at just a phenomenal rate. And particularly in the last year or so, we've won a number of awards through the NTIA and the USDA broadband programs, and have a number of broadband projects coming up out of the ground that's going to provide the connectivity that a lot of these areas have been missing. And of course, with everything that Georgia Tech is doing and everything that small technology companies and large technology companies are doing, we have the technology assets. But if we're going to compete, if we're going to prosper in the global economy, we have to make better use of these assets. We have to use them as a tool to beat up on our competition and grow our economy. And in an era of just really tight budgets, as you all are well familiar with, how do you do this? This goes to the core of Georgia Tech's mission. It's something that we feel very strongly about, but we recognize there's not a lot of resources out there to do it. So how do you do it? Well, the answer is you get creative. And as we started looking at this, we said, well, who is going to benefit the most if we can go out there and educate leaders so they can better use this technology, essentially get them to change their budget allocation so they're spending more money on technology, not because technology is cool, but because it gives them an edge and helps them do what they need to do. It's the big technology companies that are going to benefit. So this was kind of the starting point for thinking about a Georgia Technology Outreach Partnership. Essentially what we'd like to be able to do is go out around the state and conduct learning programs, engaging the leaders and the technology companies to learn together about how to really make the most of information and communication technologies. The program is relatively straightforward. It really comes down to listening to the client, listening to the customer, and understanding what they need and making data-driven decisions about where to focus our efforts. So the program that we're proposing starts out very broadly, covering a lot of ground, and then as we engage with the community and regional leaders, focusing it more narrowly until we come to a point where we can implement what we're calling technology makeovers that really have a powerful impact, and that feeds back into the process where everybody can say, I saw what my neighbor did, I saw what the company down the street did, I saw what the school superintendent or the sheriff did, and understand what that means for our community and how I can apply that in my business. The key to this, I think, is the partnership. Again, Georgia Tech feels really strongly about this. This is our mission, but it's not the kind of thing that we can do alone. First of all, we really need the technology companies actively engaged, and that's kind of where we are with it right now. We've got some very good starting points with Cisco, with IBM, with Oracle, with Intel, some other major companies. We need to build on that. We need to engage a lot of the other big technology companies, Microsoft, Google, those kind of companies would be great. The other part of the partnership that's really important are the regional entities. And part of what I've been able to do in the last decade is build some pretty strong relationships out there, working with the folks in the chairman's district, particularly Bruce Abraham, and the folks with the North Georgia Network, working with the folks in Southwest Georgia, Lee Connor, and the folks that have been putting together SG Rita, a number of other initiatives around the state, and also up in Northwest Georgia with the Appalachian Valley Fiber Network. And really, and Northwest Georgia is, I think, where we're getting started with this pilot, hopefully going to North Georgia Network area and also to Southwest Georgia in short order, but working with the Regional Commission in Northwest Georgia to pool together the stakeholders and start planning for this program. Those regional relationships and getting the local leaders actively engaged and understanding that this is about helping grow their economy and not just getting the technology, but really putting the technology to use, to showing the world what Georgia can do with this technology, I think is really key. Because, again, I have a great deal of respect for their knowledge and capabilities. We've got to leverage that and build on it by bringing in the knowledge and the capabilities of Georgia Tech and these big technology companies. So that's the kind of the key with this partnership. We definitely want to bring in a lot of other stakeholders, particularly the state level stakeholders. But I think our sense is at this point that we need a proof of concept. We need to do the pilot and demonstrate how this works, and then really actively engage everyone else. So at this point, we're focusing on the Georgia Tech value proposition. We're focusing on getting the major technology companies engaged in this process, and then we're also focused on kind of cultivating that relationship with the regional entities. Part of the beauty of this is that we're not here to ask for state funds. We realize that's not practical, to say the least, at this point. But we would like from the state level leaders is help engaging the technology companies, because y'all in this committee and other folks, your peers, could be a great tool for telling Microsoft and helping Google and other folks like that understand that this is a business opportunity for them. We want to grow their business in Georgia and work together to make our clients, our leaders, our key decision makers out there in the state more successful. And I think we have a really strong program to do it. We need some folks to jump in with us and demonstrate how this program will work and develop it and make it real. So that is essentially kind of what Georgia Technology Outreach Partnership is all about. I'm delighted to answer more questions and to do whatever I can to help you all move this program forward.
Yeah, I do have a question. I'm not sure it's for you or for Nina. Speaking of the Angel Tax Credit and the situation with getting venture capital, a complaint I've heard or a situation I've heard from people I know in the high-tech business is that Atlanta is not one of the best markets for getting the VC funding. You got VC funding in the Bay Area, in Austin, Boston, but not necessarily as much in Atlanta. Are we seeing that improving, the Angel Tax Credit helping, or I guess what do you, once you get the real small company ATDC, how difficult is it, or what challenges do you see to getting it to that next level and launching it to a full, major economic impact type company?
That's a great question, and it's on everyone's mind. To the extent I understand the situation with my private sector hat on, it is true. There's very little venture capital in Atlanta, let alone the Southeast. And if you're going to build a credible, sustainable company, you will have to have conversations outside of the region for venture capital. That's not the end of the world. I think there's a lot of other things to do first before we focus on bringing a dramatic amount of venture capital here. And if you go to other areas, including Boston and San Francisco, they will also malign the absence of early stage capital. So we all share that. Venture capitalists are moving more conservative down away from the early space that I'm in, even the growth stage. So I think the Angel Tax Credit was incredibly strategic, and the timing was excellent. And it's one of the pieces that Georgia was behind in. And so I applaud all the efforts, particularly Chuck's, around that. And those are the things, the changes that give us such heart, because it is such a vote of confidence and it has real impact. When I said it takes people, a lot of the angel investors are very knowledgeable, and so I also count them as part of the people moving opportunities forward in addition to what the money brings. In terms of what we can do about funding our companies, I think as long as you have great opportunities here, which we do with the technology, the limiting factor is people. So we will never attract venture capital here unless they have management to drive these companies forward. And to ask a venture capital company outside of Georgia to then pick one of their prime people who's hanging out in Silicon Valley, go move to Atlanta. No, they'll take the technology. They got their people. They got their money. So while all these pieces of the puzzle have to come together, my biggest frustration is as I find a technology, maybe get some grant money, maybe get a founding type of grad student who's willing to step out and get ahead of himself and learn something and start up a little startup company. Where do we go from there? And even I've got my mentor program, but now my hands are tied because I don't have a stable of great. Now in the biosciences, it's tough. In the high-tech internet side, we've got more, but they tend to be diverse. They tend to get snapped up. They tend to do other maybe more conservative things. So what ATDC is really focusing is on being that nexus where people can dock into and find out about hot technology. I mean, 6 months goes by and you miss your chance. Let's go have coffee. What's going on? So I this is a long answer to your question. So remind me if there's another piece that I haven't addressed.
No, that's it. I appreciate it. Thanks.
Chuck?
It's just a follow-up, I guess, to Mike's question. The next step after the angels, I mean, we tried to craft the angel bill such that, if you will, the angels had handcuffs over their company. If they wanted to pick up and move the company, the Angels would then lose the credit. So, I mean, at some point, if the materials, whether they be intellectual property or raw materials, make you have to go, you understand that, but we tried to keep them here. And my question is, given that, you know, what's the next step? And I think he asked it, and I may be asking it in a slightly different way. Is there a need for that next step? You mentioned that the capital is not there as it is in California and Boston and some of those areas. You know, you certainly, I don't advocate the state necessarily getting into the, you know, the private sector and pushing money in there, but there is a point where, you know, a tax credit, and I understand we have the council, I was around with them this summer to reinvent our tax code, and they're talking about credits, but there's some place in there where the continued priming of the pump yields more than it costs. Have you done any research? I mean, you know, clearly people, when they look to locate companies, they shop around from a credit, from a what does property cost? You know, what does it cost to get materials in and out? Have you done any research just from, or is there any research out there from a competitive factor that ranks, you know, at least areas of the U.S.? We're in the Southern Legislative Conference of the National Conference of State Government. Is there anything out there that ranks the areas? Can you give us, are we in the top quarter, the bottom quarter, in the middle?
I'm not
sure.
specifically aware of that research. I know different pieces of that exist, and my sense of, from interactions with others, reporting on and communicating the information, so this is secondhand, Atlanta has some huge strengths and some huge weaknesses. So I guess I would have to guess that the ranking would be somewhere in the middle. But the one thing I think that looms so large that people in the industry are hesitant to even have detailed discussions about other issues is the issue around pension fund investments. So when every other state in the nation does something, probably gives you pause. So I even hate to, I mean, when I mention this, everyone.
We can, if I can follow up, Mr. Chairman, we did try to take that bill forward over the last 2 years. Actually, our firefighters' pension fund can invest in alternative investments, and that is an interesting thing. And I think when we started that bill a few years ago, I think there were 2 states in the country, Virginia being the other one, that didn't, and doesn't Virginia now allow those investments? I may have the state incorrect, but I think there were 2 that didn't, and since then they do. We still don't. Our ERS and TRS, for some reason, doesn't want to participate in that. To follow up with this, if the chairman will allow me just 30 more seconds, we hear a lot. I mean, we hear Georgians, we have a high unemployment rate. I think we're over 10 now. We want, you know, the state to create jobs. I'm a firm believer we can't do that. I think we can help locate them. We can't ourselves create jobs. That's not the job of government, but we can try to foster the community. So I thank you for your efforts. Thank the chairman for having you in here, and ask that you help us tie all of this together through Ways and Means, through appropriations, through this committee, to try to drive a policy that'll help create them. We can't create them, and that, I think, is the illusion when the unemployment gets this high that people want the state to employ more people or require them to be employed. I think we just foster that, and we'd look to folks like yourself to help us find out what that policy should be.
Thank you. I'm very much in concurrence with the thinking, and it's exciting to be thinking at a strategic level about putting the pieces together. Thanks, Chuck.
Anyone else? Well, good. Then it means I can ask questions. One of our members from previous years is now the chairman of Science and Technology over in the Senate, Senator Barry Loudermilk. I have to make a note to myself to invite him and any other senators to sit in on our Wednesday meetings from now on. And since this has been recorded, I will offer him the opportunity to watch you and then come up with questions. This was a follow-on to what Representative Martin asked. In particularly the last 6 months to a year, there have been many articles written about people running and companies running from New York and California because of their tax problems and the debt that their states are going in. Have you had any feelers from Silicon Valley wanting to move into this area?
It's a great question. So there's a lot of talk about it, and when people start feeling pain, what do they do first? They talk about that pain. But I am not seeing an ATDC. I'm not aware of seeing a significant sea change that would be a driver of a new trend. So that's not to say that over time that pain point will drive more action. But it's a fringe consideration because overall, particularly in the early technology startup space, the drivers of decision is, do I have my team? And have I set things up logistically for the lowest burn and the highest, quickest potential return I can get? And so far, it's the people and the capital and that package that's going to drive it. And even if they can tolerate a little more, a little higher rent, a little higher costs, that's not going to hit the bottom line to this date. But I think those are important elements to watch. I think to the extent, Georgia and business in general has to keep an eye on their transportation and energy and water and all of those issues. I think that does make us an attractive alternative if there is a sea change. So I think that could be an exciting opportunity.
Thank you. I believe Senator Loudermilk has crafted some kind of legislation in cooperation with the Technology Association of Georgia to create some kind of technology, economic development, one-stop shopping center kind of thing. So we'll probably be getting that later this session. My next question goes to the other speaker, though. Thank you.
Thank you.
And that has to do with your discussions across the country with other people and that kind of bit. One of the reasons that North Georgia Network was created was because lack of transportation in that particular area really would not allow us to come up with very much light manufacturing, which for years and years that has been the bread and butter of that area, just like carpet industry is much for Northwest Georgia. And so Bruce Abraham, you mentioned, has been a big pusher of the wireless network, or the, not wireless, but yeah, the network. And I understand they're in the process of laying the cables where needed at the moment, and that some of the major current people like the hospital in Forsyth and North Georgia College and State University and Dahlonega and so forth are big, whatever you call them, nodes in this kind of thing. What do you see in terms of encouraging some of these companies that you mentioned to move further out of Atlanta once that network is in place?
Some of the big technology companies.
Yeah, we could use some people up,
That's a really good question. And
I mean, we have the best place in the state to live. We just need somebody up there to give them jobs.
A great point, and I'm personally a huge fan of the mountains. So there's no place better on earth, if you ask me. But I think what these companies look for, whether they're the big companies or the smaller technology companies, because we've had some discussions about could we place more small technology companies out in outside Atlanta, and particularly up in North Georgia, they're looking for customers. And I've had this discussion with a number of my stakeholders that if you come down and say, we've got great quality of life and now we've got this network and you need to come locate here, the technology companies will say, well, that's nice, but if I'm going to move there, I'm going to either move there to be closer to my customers or closer to a really unique workforce. that I can't get anywhere else. And of course, the two things go hand in hand, because as you're raising the capabilities of all of the businesses or other organizations in the region to use the technology, that's raising the level and the capabilities and the creativity of the workforce, which is exactly what the technology companies are looking for. So that kind of the strategy that I think we're promoting with the Georgia Technology Outreach Partnership is that instead of saying, look at what great toys we have, get out there and really play with the toys and show what amazing things you can do with it, and that's what's going to attract real attention and get the technology companies out there and really interested, and that's going to build the relationship that will lead them to want to come out and actually invest and move some of their people out into the regions.
Thank you. Any other questions? Chuck?
I don't want to give a free commercial to anybody, so I won't mention the name, but I ran into a gentleman the other night at the depot at one of the receptions. Perhaps it was Savannah Day, I can't recall. He had a company that was specialized in this, to your point, specializing, and I think he called it either insourcing or inshoring or something of the sort.
Yep.
That seems to be a real good opportunity for if I'm correct in carrying it's outstate Georgia. I mean,
right.
where there are people that are educated, intelligent, that want to work, don't want to move into the metro area. They choose the lifestyle, like you said, Mr. Chairman, of the mountains, or where they have some land out, and we now have the broadband infrastructure out there, and they have found. He has found. He specifically said to me, given the unrest in certain parts of the world, that large companies did not want to outsource, whether it be their support or technology development. And that seems to be a real good opportunity, especially in these times, again, with unemployment, to take advantage. I mean, I don't wish unrest on the rest of the world, but no. Given it happening, let us take advantage of it. I'd be real interested to see if there are probably more people in that competitive space than the one gentleman with which I spoke, or to whom I spoke. But I'd be interested to see maybe what this committee could do along those lines to make sure that people knew Georgia was open for business in that route, that the broadband was available in certain areas of the state, and people were there and educated and ready. Our technical college system does a tremendous job in preparing people, not only from a support center side, but also from a technical side of developing to be their IT engineers.
Most definitely. And, I think in the past what we've seen is there's a bit of a tendency to think of Atlanta and the rest of Georgia more in competition. But one of the things that's really important about this broadband technology is it creates a situation where it becomes much more complementary, whether you're talking about things like insourcing or rural sourcing, as it's sometimes called, where Georgia-based technology companies or Georgia-based major companies can utilize rural sourcing and workforce that's out in the rural regions, or whether you talk about other things like using technology in agriculture to bring products and services into the Atlanta area. There's just an endless number of examples of how this technology makes economic growth around the state and in Atlanta much more complementary. And the last point I'll make about that, I think that's really important, is that we're seeing these broadband developments in a lot of places around the country. And most of the places are kind of where we are right now is really focused on getting the technology up out of the ground. In 18 months or so, they're all going to start saying, okay, what do we do with this now that we have it? And I think this is an opportunity for Georgia to take a lead role in this and get out ahead of everybody else and say, just with these kind of things, rural sourcing and other examples of here's how you use the technology, and we're ahead and we're breaking the path and get folks around the country and some of these technology companies looking to Georgia and saying, how can we be a part of that and be a part of the leadership opportunity?
Thank you. Any other questions? All right. Representative Battles, would you close us with a word of prayer?
I'll do that. We thank you that you give wisdom and knowledge to those that bring about some exciting and wonderful things that will make life better for our people. We ask that you would always help us to measure our steps based on your will and purpose for our lives. Thank you for our institutions of higher learning. Continue to lead them and all who teach those students. Now go with us and lead, guide, and direct us through this day. For it is in your name we pray. Amen.